Stephanie, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
It's so good to see you. It's funny not being at work together.
I know. Well, I'm glad to get to see your pretty face today. And
You're
look at
so
those
sweet.
flowers behind you.
I
Where'd
know,
you get
they're from my
those?
husband. He brought them home the other night. Wasn't that sweet? And I put it with a picture of my family.
That's really sweet.
Oh, flowers. I
So,
actually like live. I don't tell him this, but I like live plants because I don't like to kill flowers, but I do love flowers. And it was a very sweet thought. So I love them.
that's what I said to my husband at one point too. I said, "Don't buy me flowers as they die," and then now I love them.
I know because now they don't buy them anymore because we told them not to.
Right? Exactly. So
There
I'm
we go.
excited about Tuesdays with you. What's going on Tuesdays?
We're going to start Tuesday Talks with Margaret, and so anybody can come into the conversation. We can answer questions about the family court. We can answer questions about family off of my book that I wrote called The Parenting Guidebook. We can be talking about anything in our community, especially during this COVID crisis. I think there's a lot of people who feel very isolated. I know we all can feel that way at times, and so we're going to kind of talk about the host of whatever people want to bring in and have a conversation about.
That's exciting.
We'll talk about juvenile drug court.
Exactly. So I guess this first week, a good topic would be how your life is during the pandemic. So how are you doing? What's going on? And are you still working?
Yeah, so I'm doing pretty good. Our family, we have one of our girls here with her husband staying with us because college is on break. But pretty much we're not in our normal routine by any means. I mean, obviously we both work a lot, my husband Keith and I. But right now the courts are essentially only hearing emergency or essential hearings. And so I go in if there are hearings that are essential or emergency. Otherwise, we try to decide everything based on what's on the record, the papers that have been filed on the records, the motions, the oppositions, the replies. So I actually work really long hours right now because everything has to be done in writing, and it's much slower to do it written format than in spoken format from court. So a lot of the same. I mean, we're very isolated, of course, because we are in the state of emergency here in Nevada, and my husband and I are both very, very social. We usually have events every evening when we're not under the current stay-at-home order. We basically are out all the time. So in a lot of ways, I enjoy the calmness of it and the peace and the quiet and the ability to spend time with our kids.
So how is your courtroom a little bit different now than how it was before? It seems like you're still running court, but there's a lot of changes too, right?
Right. So we have administrative orders that limit the hearings that we can have. We do try to continue hearings when we can. So it's really interesting because on a normal Tuesday, for example, it's Tuesday, there'd be a lot of people. The courtroom would be full of Department of Family Services, Child Protective Services. We would have a for the parents, the district attorney, and then we'd have parents coming in and out. And now, you know, I was in court today and we had a marshal and we had the clerk, and they were recording and everybody has a mask on. And so we're very observant of all the restrictions and we're very cautious, but everything is done by video like Blue Jeans, similar to what we're doing here. And so it's very interesting. It's hard because people have to take turns talking, and if you can't see people, it's hard to know whose turn it is sometimes. And so we're learning some of those tricks of the trade, but I also think it's going to really help us when we get back into normalcy, if there is such a thing, to kind of figure out more efficient ways to handle court.
So I know a lot of people don't know what Blue Jeans are. So what exactly is that, and how do you use it in your courtroom exactly?
So Blue Jeans is very similar to like Zoom that you would use. And so it actually is a large screen in the courtroom, just like a television screen. And then tiled and Brady Bunch style people who are in conversation. So, you know, we always go in the same order. We have the district attorney, make sure parents, and then the Department of Family Services, and the parents' attorneys, and the children's attorneys, and then the court-appointed special advocate if we have one. So everyone really is pretty good. I mean, everybody's very, very civil. And so for the most part, it's, you know, goes smoothly, but it takes a long time because sometimes it's a person getting the connection. Sometimes we're waiting for people to come in. So it's a little bit tricky, but I think it's a pretty good system that the court has going.
So I know you run your courtroom pretty differently, but in a good way. Like, you make everybody feel comfortable when you come in. So in a normal day, and not one during a pandemic like this where everything's on Blue Jeans, how do you make people feel comfortable when they come into your courtroom?
Well, there's a balance because I don't want people to feel too comfortable because I don't want them to be back. And so, of course, I'm pretty much, I mean, you know, as you know, I have a habit of speaking quickly, so I always try to slow it down. And the reality is that really family court are pretty good people on their worst day. And so we really try to show everybody respect, and we try to be kind and give them the opportunity to tell their story to some extent. I mean, obviously if they go on and on, we take what's legally relevant and we move on. But in the dependency court, which is child abuse and neglect, which I work in, parents are all represented by an attorney. We appoint an attorney. So their attorney is there to help guide them as well. And so for the most part, it's a pretty good fluid courtroom process that we have going. There's just a magical phrase, you say appearances for the record. And normally that means that, just for the court record on the recording, you're going to put on who is there. But I say to the parents, because in the dependency court, we have all parents or grandparents, and so, or other legal guardians. And so I will always say to them, can I get your name? And they'll tell me their name, and are you the mom? Yes. And then I'll say, let me have everybody else introduce themselves so you know who's in the courtroom. And in that way, it kind of segues into appearances, but it seems a little bit more natural as opposed to, let me start this proceeding without you being involved and understanding what's going on. And so it kind of brings them into it, because the reality is you want those parents engaged. You don't want them to be scared of the court system. You want them to want to engage into services, because when child abuse and neglect are cases where, let's say police respond to a domestic violence incident, and the parent who is the victim of the domestic violence is saying, no, they didn't mean it. They're okay. Yeah, I've had 3 temporary protective orders against them, but they're fine. My kids are safe. Well, they're not really safe, because the law doesn't agree that domestic violence in the home creates a safe environment for the kids generally. Or let's say that you have a parent who is actually abusing a child, and they have multiple fractures, and those are parents, you want all those parents to engage and get services. And we provide services like mental health services, drug and alcohol counseling. So we have SafeNest to provide domestic violence, and LRS to provide domestic violence classes, because you want parents to make changes so their kids can go back into their home in a safe environment.
And I know when you do interviews with children too, you actually come off the bench and speak with the children right there at their level, right? How do you do that?
Right. So when I did child custody, so I used to do child custody interviews all of the time. And so child custody has been my area for years and years. And I've interviewed hundreds of kids. And one of the things that I learned in interviewing kids is you got to make them feel comfortable. Now, most people don't feel comfortable when you walk into a courtroom. They're scared and they don't know what's going on. And so one of the things I do is I usually I'll step off of the bench, and I will talk. And sometimes I'll take my robe off, and I usually take my robe off, and I always used to take my robe off. But one day I did an interview with a little girl, and I came off the bench and I took my robe off before she came into the courtroom, and I just shook her hand and greeted her. And she said, "You're supposed to have a robe on." And I said, "Oh, my robe." So I do. So I ask the kids usually, but I have a system where I turn the chair, because their attorneys are always going to be present. I never do anything off of the record. So I have in the gallery behind the little bar, and then I'll turn the child's chair away from them, and then I'll sit across from them, and we'll talk, and everything will be recorded. We'll make sure the recording devices are close. And I just ask some questions about their life first. And I usually start with something about what they're wearing, and I'll say, I really like your hat. It's really cool that you have a bee on your hat, or whatever it is, and kind of calm them down. And then I usually ask them questions like, do you know why you're here? And did anybody ask you to tell me anything? That's a very good insight.
Right.
I want to know if those kids have been coached. And I did one time have a little girl that said, and I asked near the end, is there anything that anybody asked you to tell me that you haven't told me yet? And she pulls out of her pocket a little note that her mom had written to say, make sure to tell her this. And
wow,
you can ask kids questions depending on their age. A lot of them are pretty brutally honest. Some of them have been coached, and you can usually figure out pretty quickly if they've been coached. So I do a lot of child interviews, not as much now unless we have a case where somebody wants the child to be interviewed. But it's traumatic for a child, especially in a case where they might be testifying against their parents, to take the stand and testify. Although there are, testimony, what we call testimony by alternative methods, that allow there to be, a safe courtroom environment to the extent we can. Like, for example, we might have the parents step out. The attorneys may still be, usually still be there, but at least they can partake, or they may be in a different room on an audio visual feed, and they'll watch the conversation going on. Just depends on what the attorneys and the judicial officer agree to.
There's a lot going on in your courtroom, then. You do a lot of different things.
I do a lot, and on Thursdays we have juvenile drug court, and of course I'm passionate about helping our kids in recovery. And so we get a lot of kiddos that are youth that come in and they have struggled with drugs, alcohol, usually for mental health issues. They're trying to self-medicate or they've gotten into the wrong group. So we provide them services, and I love that. And I also work with truancy in Clark County in schools. So I do. I love it though. I enjoy it tremendously.
What do you miss most about normalcy? I feel like all of this is, you know, I mean, it's still going on, but we're in such a different time right now. So if everything were to go back to normal, what is it that you miss most about just normal day to day?
I think normal day to day is I do really enjoy the routine of life. I mean, we have a good life and I enjoy our routine. I miss socializing with my friends and our, you know, close friends. We always play cards once a week, and we go out to sushi, and we do, you know, we have a group of really, really close friends, and we do a lot together. And I miss that. I miss having Sunday dinners at my house. So I always have at least once a month a Sunday dinner at my house with a bunch of friends. And so of course I miss that right now.
Conversations, socializing, people, even people at work, right? Like actually getting to talk to those children, even in your courtroom, but outside the courtroom too, just being able to interact with people.
Just to have fun. Like I love to cook and I love to bake. I love to have people over. I really just enjoy the conversations of life. I think kids are amazing and I really like interacting with them. I have 4 grandkids and we have a great time when we're together.
So in a normal day-to-day, how do you balance work life and personal life? Like what does your work-life balance look like?
So my work-life balance is I pretty much keep to a schedule, and I usually leave home about 5:30, and I go to yoga and I enjoy that, and then I go on to work, and then in the evenings my husband and I will have dinner together and it'll be fun. I mean, our kids are all grown now for the most part, so one of the other things I love about the quarantine is I get to have my daughter here with her husband, and you know, we have kids. One of them's home right now. They kind of rotate in and out, but they're all off and in college or graduated.
So definitely more family time. I know, I feel like all of us should appreciate the forced family time that we have, right?
Well, right. And I think, you know, one of the things I do see a lot of, or hear a lot about parents is just plugging their kids in, and they plug their kids into the digital media. And to me, I think I certainly understand that there's a time for your own sanity, you got to do that. But I was, when my kids were young, you know, television's for my benefit, not for theirs. So if I was going to put them in front of PBS or something, I would do that when I needed a moment. But really, it's such a great time to play a game with your family members. And one of the things that I think is really fun is when you have extended family members in different parts of the country and you get on an app and you play a game. And so that's kind of a fun thing for families to do too. And so, but just playing card games. I love card games. I love Rummikub. Anybody that plays Rummikub? Love that game for Christmas for my son and daughter-in-law, and I really like that.
Well, you know, I have 2 little ones at home, and it's hard enough. I mean, you see, I have to close my door or else they'll come banging on the door. So this is one of those times where I do use electronics to kind of just, you watch your iPad for a second. But if you were to give like really good parenting advice to somebody like me where I have so much going on, yet I have 2 little ones that I have to keep preoccupied, what would be advice that you can give me right now?
Well, I think number one is that not living by anybody else's expectations and living by what you think is appropriate for you and your family. And I feel like one of the really, really good things we can do for our kids is just have a bedtime routine, which means that whatever our evenings look like, if it's crazy and we can't always sit down to dinner at least once or twice a week, make sure we do have a traditional family dinner with no electronics. But every night a bedtime routine is so important for kids to be able to go to sleep, to wind down. One of my favorite things is 8:30 at night as my kids got older, even in high school, that was our reading time. We sat down as a family and we're very religious and we read scriptures and we just spent that time together. And then we said a prayer together and then everybody would head up to bed and I would always go in and say goodnight to everybody. When your kids are little, it meant that if it was bath night, we'd give them a bath. We'd always read bedtime stories. You can't replace that time in my view, even if it's a short book that you don't hurry through, but you enjoy that time. And one of my very favorite tricks that I think every parent with a young child needs to know is make sure that you play audiobooks. And so we always had a ton of books. And at the time we had CDs and we would play them. We'd go to the library and get Magic Tree House or something fun and play it. And you know how parents, so often those kids just don't want to stay in bed. You put them to bed and they get up. I need a drink of water. I need this. I need. Right. And so we had a routine with our kids. And when we got them into bed, we would say, okay, do you need anything else? Any more bathroom trips? Anything else? Need a drink of water? Okay, whatever you need. Okay, now this is how it's going to go. And they knew what the routine was. Is when I started the book, as long as their head was on the pillow, the book stayed on. But as soon as they got up for something else, unless it was an exceptional circumstance, they would get, I'd always have the door, they liked the door open, they liked to have the hall light on, and they liked to have their book. And as soon as they got up and they, just to play or to do something, they get to choose which of those three they would go off first. Would it be the light and the hall go off first? Would it be the story go off first? Or would it be the door close first? And there's only one time in my kids' life, once I learned that trick, that the door actually closed, the lights went off, and the story went off. They loved reading, and they loved listening to books when they were in bed. And it's such a great way for the mind to work and the imagination to be developed. And it doesn't make them go to sleep right away, right? Because they are going to lull into the story. Mm-hmm. Younger kids would fall asleep really fast, but my older kids sometimes would sit there and read, and they were avid readers, and they still are avid readers to this day. And I hope on long family trips, we did the same thing. But definitely, you know, there's a lot of research on it, the benefit of a bedtime routine, a ritual that kids have. And that's right. Security too. They know what to expect. Time periods are really important, especially in this COVID time where we're in quarantine, really keeping those routines for the sleep benefit for the kids. Somebody gave me some really great advice that I live by every day, especially if I had a stressful day. And it is, look at your life living it backwards. So when you're 90 years old and you're sitting on a rocking chair on your front porch, what's really going to have made a difference in life? Mm-hmm. Probably the thing you're completely stressed out about today isn't going to make a difference when you're in that, you know, looking back and judging life backwards. The things that are really going to matter are who's sitting there with you, who's coming by your house to visit, what kind of a relationship do you have with your grandkids. And if Marie Osmond ever saw this video, one thing, she was my childhood idol, and I will say she gave an interview when she had grandkids, and she said a very important thing. She said, you know you've lived a good life if you're a happy grandparent and your kids still bring their kids around you to be influenced. Mm-hmm. Because your kids see everything. They see your good days, they see your bad days. They're still okay with bringing their kids around you. When you're a grandparent, that's a pretty good milestone. That's pretty positive. And they want to have those kids around you. They want your influence. I think that's a pretty good life lived. And I got that part from Marie Osmond.
I was thinking the other day that, you know, all of us as adults right now think back on this time, 2020, what happened? Oh, it was a coronavirus, COVID-19, there was a pandemic, the economy was crashing. But I'm thinking if I were to ask my kids that 10 years from now, they're not going to remember any of that. They're going to remember that mommy and daddy were at home for a while and we had our home routines. We had school at home. We had lunches and dinners at home instead of just dinners at home. And I realized just, you know, what you just said right now is that that's what they're going to remember, what happened during this time, right? They're not going to remember anything about what we remember right now during this time.
It's going to be a completely different memory. You're 100% right. And it is going to be this is going to be a time I hope parents look back and families look back and go, like you said, we were together. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to have that perspective, especially for people who don't have work right now, who are prohibited from going to work, who can't have a paycheck. It's a hard time. It's a stressful time. And I do not discount that. For our first responders who are taking care of those who are ill or sick, police officers who are still out on the streets protecting us, you know, the ambulance drivers who are going to some of these crisis situations where they expose themselves every day, the firefighters, I mean, the first responders are crucial. And so I certainly want to say that we need to give a shout out to all of our first responders who are keeping us safe. And so it is hard. It's a hard time. And I'm not discounting that at all. And so I tend to be very much of an optimist. And so I try to look at the brighter sides. And those are some of the things I hope we can look back and remember is we did have a little bit more time as families right now.
Right.
Family. Well, let's define a family though, because a family is whoever is in your immediate circle, friends, loved ones, blood relations. And it doesn't limit it to just blood relations. It's anybody that's in your immediate circle. And I would always say our family is fluid. They come and go. Families can be, the traditional family that we think of. It could be any variation of that. It can be two moms, two dads, grandparents raising their grandkids. It can be a single parent, a single father, a single mother. It's anybody who you feel loved by in your circle. That is a family.
I think that is really important to understand too, that family isn't defined by one definition. I think it is defined by exactly what you just said. People, your trusted circle, the people that care about you, that would help you, that would be there regardless of what's going on with you. And it doesn't have to be somebody that's blood related to you. So I'm really excited because I think we talked about next week, we were going to talk all about family involvement and engagement, and
Right.
more parenting tips that you'll have for us next week, right? I mean, I'm sure during this time for, custody cases and parents who have to deal with, kids going to two different homes, I'm sure that's really difficult during this pandemic too. So
Right,
I know
and there's been a lot of discussion about, do you have to exchange your kids? And generally speaking, yes. I mean, I'm not giving legal advice, but do you have to if your kid's going to fly out of the area for spring break, maybe that's not going to happen. And maybe instead you agree with your co-parent that they're going to have more time during the summer or another holiday or something. And I'm really hopeful parents can come to some agreement, because a lot of it's going to be very much based on where they live, what their circumstances are, what their work life is like. But those are realities for a lot of the families in our community, as they are sharing their kiddos back and forth.
Well, I'm excited for week 2 with Tuesday
Thank
Talks
you.
with Margaret, because we're going to talk all about that: parenting, family engagement, family involvement. And then later, I guess your week 3 discussion too, just to give all of the people watching a little preview, you're going to talk about you and your husband and what your
relationships. Yeah, we're going to talk about relationships, how we met, and some of the relationship advice, because we've done presentations on relationships and how to keep them lively and how to, have a long-lasting love. I mean, I'm in my second marriage, and the reality is I kind of messed it up the first time. And so now I've really felt like, I learned from my mistakes, and, I think that we're moving forward. So I think we individually grow and we change, and that happens. And so how do we continue to make sure that we have good, positive relationships in our life?
Right. So I'm excited. So Tuesdays.
It's going to go live pretty soon. This first one we didn't do live, but we're going to start them live and try to figure these out. And so I appreciate you coming up with this great idea. I love this. And so it's going to be a fun time.
Thank you for having me involved. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it'll be great. Thanks so much. All right, I'll see you guys later. Have a good week. Be well.